three, two, one. Hello, Urmi. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. How are you doing?
Very well, very well. And to get us straight into it, I want to start a little bit with your language history, so to speak. So, could you tell us maybe a little bit about how many languages you speak, when you started learning, maybe how you started learning as well?
Sure, it will be my pleasure. So I speak 4.5 languages, and basically it all started with my parents. My parents are from Bangladesh, and I was born and raised in Italy. So basically my mother tongue was Bengali, so that was the first language that I learned. And then Italian was the language that I basically grew up speaking because that's where I grew up. And so Italian became sort of like my adopted mother tongue because it's a language that I use very frequently. It's what I knew more, even more than Bengali. And then in Italy, so basically we just speak Italian. I only had Italian friends, and when I would go out, I will only use Italian. And in the education system in Italy, they also teach you English as a second language. So English was something that I started to learn since I was 8 years old, and it went through until I would say until I was 20 years old that I kept like learning English. And I did an actual program that was just based on learning languages. And then in high school, I decided to learn two more languages. So I went on learning French, and I went on learning German. However, this is what I tell people is that I never count German as a language that I know, although back in the days I knew quite well. I even did a certificate. I knew how to speak. I knew how to like have conversation, write and stuff like that. But then I lost it because I never used it.
Mm.
So then what happened is I started university and I took to learn a language that I actually enjoyed a bit more, and that was Spanish. So Spanish was a language I fell in love right away, and it's very much similar to Italian, but I feel like it sounds much nicer than Italian. So
Yeah.
Spanish is a language that I say is the half. That's why I say 4.5 because it's the one that I know like half. Like I took intense courses. I knew how to write. I know how to how to speak. I understand when people speak, but now it's the language I'm learning on my own right now to like see if I can go back at it. And so I have like an actual schedule where I'm like, okay, this day I'm gonna do Spanish, and I actually devote time to learn it because my plan is to actually know it properly as an actual language and tell people that I can speak five languages instead of saying 4.5. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So then it sounds like you went through very different methods, so to speak, of learning each language, right? The first two being more on the natural acquisition probably side of it, and then like you said, English from school, which I feel like is a very common story, and then French and German at school, and then Spanish by yourself. So looking through all of these different lenses of different forms of language acquisition, which one did you feel was the most perhaps enjoyable for you? Because when we learn a language, I suppose when we're young, then it's a little bit difficult to judge. But then going through it as an adult, which type of language learning did you enjoy the most?
Um, I think I enjoyed all of them equally, to be honest. I think I had a talent for learning languages, so that's why I never felt it was difficult for me. Like, yes, there is a grammar, there are exceptions and things like that, but I think every language has its own beauty because it's unique, it's an own way. Every language comes with a culture, different tradition, different things. So I feel like I enjoyed pretty much all of them. And in school, actually, when they taught us English, French, and German, they were all taught pretty much on the same way because the program was focused on that. So we would do like commerce in English, commerce in French, commerce in German. We would do like literature in French, literature in German, literature in English. So it was very much structured. And so I would say like I enjoy pretty much all of them in the same way. Of course, English I would say is the one that probably if I have to just was the one that I liked a little bit more, but I think it's because it was easier. And this is why it's
Mm.
international language. But I would say that I also enjoy a lot Spanish now that I have the chance to do it on my own. And I do enjoy also learning Spanish a lot. I think, I don't know, there's something special about this language. So
Okay, that's a very interesting perspective. So then, do you think that for your own learning with Spanish, are you going more so in the academic approach that, okay, like you said, that you sit down, okay, I'm studying this, 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 and that, or is it more of a natural flow for you?
Yeah, I'm not applying anything academic if I have to tell the truth. I'm just learning like very like natural flow because I feel like when I learned English, French, and German, it was at a different time. I know I know that I sound a little bit old by saying this, but what I mean by this is that at least when I was in high school, we didn't have access to, let's say, podcasts. We didn't have like YouTube, and also especially when I was growing up, let's say like yeah, having internet was more like a want, wasn't more like a need. So like having access to internet was something that not everyone had. I only had access to internet when I was at school, for instance. And so, for instance, because I didn't have access to like YouTube, I didn't have access to like internet or podcast, there wasn't a way for me to actually learn it that way. Whereas now I actually have access to all these resources. So I'm able to learn it through other means. So now I use a lot YouTube and I watch a lot of blogs. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and that's probably those are two things that I've been applying differently than when I learned English, French, and German. So it's a more natural, I would say. Yeah, I'm trying to learn it more in a spontaneous manner rather than just focusing on the grammar, for instance.
And how are you utilizing blogs and, like you said, videos and podcasts? How are you using that? Do you have a specific method of going through it?
So for instance, for podcasts, what I do is that because I have a very long commute to work, so I want to like maximize the use of my time during the day. I try to use every hour of my day to do something and to learn something. So I use like that hour to actually listen to a podcast. So that's when I am listening to something. And then during my lunch hour, sometimes I also use that time to also learn something. And that's when I focus on the grammar, for instance. And I also have like grammar books at home. And I also have like Spanish stories book that I read when I have some time, but I usually try to focus like on the grammar listed during lunchtime. And then another day during the week, what I do is I try to watch like some vlogs. And I feel like vlogs are a bit more relaxing. So I try to do it usually in the evening. And what I do is that I watch the vlog and I'm taking notes actually. Like I'm trying to listen and understand what they're saying. And then I go back and see if whatever they said matches with whatever I wrote. And then if I do not know a word, I try to use Google and translate it. So that's the approach I take.
With the notes that you take, is it a kind of a summary of what they're talking about, or do you take note of any specific grammar, vocabulary, and those types of things as well?
No, it's not a summary. It's more like if they say a specific expression or specific
Mm,
word that I'm not familiar with, I actually write it down. Or more like dictation, is that how we say
yeah.
or that type of thing where like they're saying the word and I'm just writing it and I just pause it.
Okay. And then do you keep a record of all of these words that you've written, or do you,
Yes.
okay, I know this, I translated. No, you keep
Yes,
them.
I keep them in a notebook so that if I have to go and revise them or if I have to refer back to it, I have it somewhere like in a tangible, I would say. Yeah.
And how often do you go through it?
Um, so far, not that much.
Yeah, no
I
pressure.
haven't yet because I'm just so I just went for now. I haven't gone through it because I'm trying to like see as many things as possible, and then I would go through it once I'm done with like watching a bunch of vlogs. So I haven't given myself a timeline yet. I think I just want to like focus on like learning right now rather than revision.
Do you work in the same way with your podcasts as well, or do you have a little bit of a different approach to podcasts?
So for podcasts, it depends. It really depends because as I'm commuting to work, I don't have a pen and paper to write down notes. I just strictly listen to it. But what I do is that when I come back home, I try to see if I have access to the transcript and read that. That's what I try to do. Or if let's say I don't have time to like listen to the podcast, what I do is that when I come home, I try to listen to it without any transcript, and then I take notes of whatever they have said.
Perfect. So a little bit of a different approach initially, like you said, that you first don't have the time or you don't just have the facilities, but
Mm-hmm.
then later on you do come back to it, take some notes,
Mm-hmm.
vocabulary, and so on. Wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And
Yes.
with all of
Yes.
the languages that you speak, all of the languages that you have, I want to come back to something very interesting that you said with German, that you used to be more proficient and then you didn't use it and so you lost it. So how do you maintain all of your languages? Because it's not one that you just speak every day and it's easy, but to maintain a good level in all of them, how do you juggle that?
So because I did this mistake with German where I feel like I wasted like my 3 years of learning it and now I don't use it anymore. I was like, I don't want to do this for the other languages that I know. So what I do is that I actually use all of them pretty much equally. Yeah, I would say besides Spanish, I use all of the four languages pretty much equally because I work in a French environment and I live in Montreal, which is a bilingual city. So we have to use both languages. So I try to communicate both in English and French. A work environment, as I said, I would say like 80% is it's French, especially because we deal with clients that are francophone. And then at home, I actually speak English and Bengali, and then with my family, I speak Italian and Bengali. So I'm using pretty much all of them equally.
And how are you planning on using your Spanish? Are you planning on finding some maybe speaking partners, or what's your plan?
For Spanish, it's gonna be only when I go on vacation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very nice. Very nice. So you have to go on frequent vacations then?
Yeah, I have to go on frequent vacation and maybe find a friend or something with who I can speak Spanish only.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so do you think that the key to you maintaining all of these languages is just speaking, or do you think that it would
Yes.
have been enough if you listen, if you maybe read something, or is that not enough in your opinion?
Um, so I think you need a little bit of everything, but I think that if you are someone who's able to speak it, I'm assuming that you already have a very strong foundation. So if you want to keep it alive, it's important that you speak it because I feel like once you don't speak a language, it becomes rusty. You have hard time, finding words. So I think it's always a good practice to speak it as much as possible and to immerse yourself somewhere where you can speak all of them. So I feel like the fact that I live in Canada helps me a lot in a way because I have no choice but use two languages that are not my native languages. Whereas back when I was in Italy, the only language that I mainly used was Italian. I would say probably like 80% of the time. And then at home, it was just mainly Bengali. But then as I was growing up, I feel like I also started to use Italian even in my at home, especially with my sister, because we felt like that was the best way for us to express ourselves. Whereas with my parents, for instance, we only speak Bengali. Yeah.
Of course. And so do you find that you have different feelings, different emotions, maybe a different personality in all of your languages?
I don't know about personality because this is a question that I do ask myself as well, but I do feel like there is a different side of me that comes out
Yeah.
when I'm speaking a different language, especially with Italian. I feel like there is a real side of me coming out, especially because I feel like there's a lot of emotion involved. We're very much animated when you speak Italian. And whereas I feel like when I speak English, I'm a bit more calmer. I don't know how to say it.
Okay.
So I feel like there is a different aspect or that comes out of me whenever I'm speaking a different language. And but I would say the Italian side brings like probably the most real side of me. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And do you see that transitioning into Spanish a little bit? Maybe not yet, but are you seeing the influences or not so much, not from that
Um,
side?
and I would say not yet. Not yet. No, not yet.
Are you
We'll
seeing a
see.
different side?
Um, No, you know what? It's so funny that you ask because I feel like when people say about Italian, they feel like it's a language of love. And I don't know if it's French or Italian, but I feel like people that I have met, they are like, oh, Italian is a language of love, and they're like somehow fascinated. That's how I feel when I hear people speaking Spanish. It's almost like I'm like I don't know. I'm like in another world when they're speaking Spanish, and
Yeah.
like I'm lost in that world. So that's how I feel about it. So I don't know. I don't know to be honest. It's a tough question. It's a tough answer to give right now.
Certainly. Very subjective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And do you have a favorite language?
Probably Spanish.
Yeah.
Yes, probably Spanish, which is why I feel like I will never be tired of studying Spanish because there's something in it that makes it so like special and unique, and I really, really enjoy it. I even try to like listen to Spanish music, and even if I might not understand everything, or sometimes I do, I always try to have like read the lyrics and then listen to it, and I do that a lot with Spanish music, and I do enjoy Spanish a lot.
Cool. Okay. Okay. And do you have any favorite skills to practice that I really love? Let's say practicing my speaking or my reading. Do you have any favorites?
For me, it's the speaking.
Mhm.
And I'm going to tell you why. It's because I feel
Yeah.
like because for sure when you're speaking more than one language, you have an accent, and I do like the fact that, I would, so this is the thing, I would be very conscious before that every time I was speaking a different language, my Italian accent would come out and it made me really like self-conscious about this to the point that I was like, I don't know if I like it. But now when I speak another language and there is my Italian accent that comes out, I'm like, you know what? I should be proud of it. It just shows that I know more than one language. So I do like the fact
Right.
that there is my Italian side when I'm speaking a different language. So that's probably one thing that I enjoy about the languages is speaking, because I feel like you see an accent, and when you see an accent is what identifies as a person. So I really like that part.
I really like how you mentioned that because I feel like that's a very huge mental obstacle that a lot of people have that, oh no, I'm going to make a mistake. I have an accent when I speak. I don't sound native. I don't sound natural, and all of these negative self-thoughts. But like you said, I mean, all that's saying is that you can speak one more language potentially than that other person that you're talking to. So nothing to be
Yes.
really ashamed of, certainly.
And exactly. Also, I agree with you, and I remember especially when I was growing up, I used to watch MTV, and they would show like shows of people speaking in English. Like some shows were just in English. Like I would watch it when I was in Italy, and I remember I would always try to imitate their accent. I was like, I want to have that American accent. I want to sound native. I want to sound like natural like them. But then when I grew up, I was like, you know what? Why was I trying to sound like these people? Like, I
Right.
think I should be just proud of my own accent. It just makes you very much authentic. So I really like that part of like learning a language.
So was it just the passing of time that made you realize this, or was it something that you heard, something that you saw that, oh, that makes sense?
And no, it was just through passing of time. And I would say that initially, when I would like, let's say, I would speak, I was so afraid of listening to myself because I know my accent was so strong. And I remember not wanting to listen to my voice, but now I'm like, you know what? I should not be afraid of this. I should not be ashamed of this because everyone has an accent. And yes, you will have people making fun of you, but the ones that make fun of you are the ones that only knows one language. So I feel like they
Right.
should just look at themselves instead of looking at the other people. But it was something that I feel like it just happened through time as I was trying to accept myself and accepting let's say my challenges or my imperfections. There we go. Yeah.
And did you have any of these kinds of situations, like you said, that somebody was making fun of you, or haha, you don't know that word, any of these kinds of situations, or did you pass through life without those types of things?
I mean, I did have people making fun of me, but it was more like in an innocent way.
Mm,
And it's because like, yeah, there are some words where in my mind they sound the same, but I know they're written differently and I still do the same mistake. It's because I can't, like, I'm not able to distinguish them. So yeah, I had people making fun of me, but it was more in a fun way. Like I never got offended, but it did make me realize that okay, I do have some like, issues there. Yeah.
certainly, certainly. And I want to circle back a little bit to what you said before that you feel like you're naturally good at languages. So then on the flip side of that, are there any things that you find challenging or difficult in learning languages?
You know what? Yes. I think it's probably the exceptions to the rules.
Mm.
And I've seen that a lot with French. And unfortunately, there are way too many exceptions in this language. I mean, you know what? Probably there are also in Italian. The thing is, I learned Italian as it was like almost my mother tongue. So I do not know what are the
Right.
exceptions, but I'm pretty sure there are so many in Italian as well, especially because they're all like Latin languages. But in French, I can see there are so many exceptions, and it's so peculiar in its own way. And so I feel like that's probably the most difficult thing about learning languages is yes, you have the rule, but then, oh, you know what? There are three exceptions. So you have
Yeah,
to
right.
memorize those things. And so I feel like that's the difficulty with learning languages is you have to memorize all these exceptions. And that sometimes I feel like it can be demotivating.
Have you found a way of getting through that? I mean, like you said, memorizing them, but in a any particular order, perhaps that okay, I start with this, then moving on to that, or just as they come up, okay, this is the exception, memorizing it, okay, moving on.
Yeah, so I remember when I was at school, I used to, and at least that's the way they would teach us, it was just to memorize those things, but I never felt like that was the right way because you're just memorizing, but you're not applying it in real life. So I feel like a lot of the exceptions, I learned them as I've been living in Canada.
Sure.
And so I feel like because I'm like in the situation, in a real life situation, I have no choice but know the exception. I feel like a lot of the times I know the exceptions because as I'm listening to people, I know what they're saying. So I feel like that's the best way to learn, not like memorizing a list of exceptions, but as they're used in real life, as they're applied in real life situations.
And have you ever used the non-exception form and somebody corrected you, as you said, while living in Canada, that, oh, no, no, you should actually say this instead, or does that not really happen?
No, to be honest, no, it never happened. No. And I think they just let it go. Even if there might be a mistake, I think they just let it go and do not point it out. Because I feel like even native speakers make a lot of errors and mistakes when they're speaking.
Okay, that's very motivating.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. And how do you get through that, what you said before, that these exceptions can be quite demotivating? How do you work through that? That, okay, I want to learn the language. This is not really a lot of fun. How do you get through that mentally?
You know what? It's a good question, whatever you're saying. How do you get through it? For my personal experience, I feel like I'm not someone who likes to let go of things. Like I know that a lot of people, especially when they're learning a language and they're so demotivated because there's so many things to remember because it's not something that happens overnight. But I think it's what keeps you going is the determination and the discipline that you have towards learning a language. So every language comes with challenges. It's not something that's supposed to be an easy path. Otherwise, everyone would know so many languages. I think it's
Right.
about keeping to the schedule and staying committed to your plan. And once you go through that, it will be easier. And it's just making sure that you stick to it. So I feel like commitment is a big thing when it comes to learning a language. And I've seen it a lot, especially because I do teach, let's say, I do give conversation lessons in English and Italian, and I can see some students who just were like, you know what, I don't know how to speak it, and I tried to help them out as much as I could, but then they just decided to like stop learning the language because it was too hard for them. But I think it's about staying committed and having the resilience to like keep going without seeing these obstacles as something that will stop you, but more something that you have to like overcome and go over that passing line, basically.
Do you think it's important to set that intention at the very beginning that I'm learning this language because of XYZ? Do you think that's important to have that thought from the very beginning that, okay, it gets hard, it gets difficult, but this is why I started?
Yes, I think it's always important to have an end goal in mind, like an and like a destination. And I think a lot of the times, like having vision boards or writing it down like on a journal, it helps you because I feel like you can go back to it and see, okay, I'm having a difficult moment right now, but I have to go back to my initial plan. And that was, okay, I have to learn this. And so I feel like that keeps you very much grounded and it makes you very focused. So I feel like it's always important to have that as an initial step whenever you're learning a language. And then when you feel like you're lost and you want to give up, just go back to it and remember what you have told yourself initially. So it's important. I think it's important. I do have vision boards that I usually try to create at the beginning of the year. I do have also like a journal what I write all my goals, and I feel like they help me. They help me to achieve everything that I wrote down.
If I may pry a little bit into your goals, do you make them very specific that I want to be able to get to C2 in 2023 by the end of October and do XYZ? Do you get very specific with your goals, or is it I want to speak or I want to communicate?
So it depends on the goal. It depends on the goal. Some goals I do have a timeline, whereas some others I don't have a timeline because I feel like it's a more like a work in progress and it's a more
Mm,
long term. So for instance, like for Spanish, I don't have a set deadline. because I feel like it's something that will take me a lot of time until I'm able to master it properly. So it really depends on some goals. Some goals I feel like if it's short term, then I will write, okay, I want to finish it by the end of the year. Whereas some other goals I just have more like a medium or long term plan, and that's how I like to plan it, because I feel like, especially with languages, because it's not something that you can learn overnight. And I feel like if you want to be as good as a native speaker, it is something that's more like continuous process. And so that's why I don't have like a specific deadline.
Certainly. And it's a very good point that you made here, and you're certainly right that even as native speakers of whether this is Italian or English or whatever other language, I mean, there are certainly always words that come up, and let's say internet words that you're always learning even as a native speaker, or you're reading a book or an article and, oh, I don't know that word. So it's not that I feel like a lot of people have that misconception of, oh, I have to know everything that there is to know to be like a native speaker, which is so very far from the truth. And do you think that this is also a thought that you have in mind as you're learning languages, that, okay, I'm not perfect, maybe I will never be, and that's okay?
But do you mind repeating the question?
Of course, of course. I'm wondering if this is something that keeps you motivated as well, that, okay, I may not be perfect in this language and I may not ever be perfect, and that's okay.
Yeah, I do tell that to myself.
Yeah.
I told that a lot, especially with French. Like it's been a long time that I've been living in Canada. But I remember, for instance, when I moved to Canada, the French they were using here, it was the Quebecois French. It was something else. It was not what I have learned at school. So it made me really like aware that, look, this is completely different. I might have to like, revise some things. I might have to learn something new. And I had to like start, I had to like learn a lot with the speaking, and a lot also with the listening, because their accent is very, very different from the one from France. And so that was like a challenge, and it made me really aware that, yeah, I knew how to speak, and I used to tell people like, I can speak French, but then when I'm put on the spot, I feel like I was blocked. I was not able to answer. So
Yeah.
I even now very much aware that I'm not perfect, but you know what? I feel like I've reached a good enough level that allows me to work in a French environment. So I feel like I still have to be proud of myself of being able to do that, because it's in Canada, especially in Montreal, when you do an interview, you do interviews in both in English and French. Yes, depending on the job, but usually if you apply for a job that it's bilingual, you have to do interviews in both in English and French, and they will test in French. And the fact that I managed to do that was a big accomplishment for me. And so that's how I told myself, I'm not perfect, but it doesn't mean like you shouldn't try for perfection. That's how I like to see it. I think you should try for progression. And so that's how I saw it. It was like I was able to progress. I was able to show myself as I can speak, and you don't need to tell anyone that you do not know it perfectly. They will know it when you speak, but as long as you are able to have a conversation, it just shows a lot. So
And do you celebrate the little successes as you go along, that, oh, I know how to conjugate this verb, or I know how to do this, I know how to do that? Do you celebrate all those little things too?
I don't. I don't. I know we should. I also tell people you should celebrate your successes. I don't, but I do a lot of self-care where I like treat myself with I don't know, it's something that I enjoy, like a nice walk, a nice run, a nice plate of pasta, chocolate, ice cream. So that's how I like to like treat myself. It's more about self-care rather than having big rewards. So that's how I like to like treat myself. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And do you think that also is a bit of a trick to keep yourself motivated, that, hey, I did this good thing. Now I'm eating some pasta. Let's do more of that.
Yes. Yes, yes. Like
Nice.
usually what I tell myself is that, okay, I'm not gonna buy these unless I can do this. So that's how
Cool.
I feel like that's how I try to like achieve my goals. Because I think the other day, what happened is I passed an exam, and I told myself, okay, I will only buy this chocolate if I'm able to pass the exam. And so then I went to buy the chocolate once I know that I passed the exam. Yeah.
Nice. So you're very strict with yourself. That okay,
Yes,
only when I
yes,
pass. Nice.
yes, only when I pass, yes.
Wonderful. Okay. And have you had any breakthrough moments? And I mean that in all of your languages, whether we think back to English or whether this was French or Spanish now, have you had any, wow, now I understand this moments in your learning?
Hmm. I don't think I did. I don't like a moment of realization where like, oh wow, no,
Yeah.
no,
No.
never. I don't think
Okay.
I don't think so. If I'm trying to think, but I'm like, no, I never
Okay.
had that type of moment. No.
Okay. So it's just learning as it comes along and
It,
okay, that makes
and
sense. That makes sense.
yes,
Okay.
exactly, exactly. Yes.
Okay. And do you think that's very consistent in your learning journey? That, okay, let's say I learn something new every single time that I sit down, or I learn something new every time I read or watch something. Is it very consistent?
Yes, so I feel like with learning languages, and I can see like the difference is that when I was in school, it was very methodological. Like it
Hmm.
was just based on like there was a structure you had to follow. Whereas right now it's more like, okay, it's like do whatever you want. And so I feel like there is a difference in the way I'm learning a language because yes, at school they focus a lot on grammar, but then they also focus a lot on conversation. They also focus a lot on culture. Whereas right now, for instance, when I'm listening to a podcast, it's not about, okay, how do you conjugate this verb or stuff like that. It's more about learning the tradition, the cultures, and things like that. So that's what I like about learning right now is that I'm not just learning like the specific things that are like the foundation of learning a language. I'm learning about the tradition, I'm learning about the cuisine, I'm learning about the art, I'm learning about history. So that's what I like because I feel like it's like you're learning double because you're learning how
Yeah.
to say things, but then you're learning about your culture. So I enjoy that part of learning languages right now.
And do you still focus a little bit on the grammar side? For example, like you said, of Spanish, do you still focus on that when you're reading something, when you're listening to something that, oh, okay, they said it in this way or this tense or something like that? Or is it completely outside of your focus?
No, no, I'm not focusing a lot on the grammar because I feel like probably grammar is the most boring thing about learning a language because it's all like you just have to memorize. These are the rules. You have to know this. And I don't like I'm not I don't say I don't quite enjoy it, but I feel like it's when things are applied in real life, it's when you get the most out of it. So now I'm just focusing on like listening to phrases, expressions, or listening to the different accents. And there is this YouTube channel that I follow. I think it's called Easy Spanish, where they basically like do interviews to people and they go in like different parts of the world. So they go to like, let's say Barcelona, they go to Madrid, or they go to Mexico. And then I focus more on like listening to their accent and how they
Mm,
differentiate among each other. Because one thing that I noticed was when I went to Mexico and then I also went to Dominican Republic, I could notice the difference in their accent. It was very remarkable. So those are the things that I pay attention to. I also went to Barcelona and I felt like it was completely different. They were also speaking a different language. It was in Spanish. It was
Catalan?
Catalonia. I think that's how you
Yeah,
Catalan. Yeah.
yeah.
And so these are the things that I pay attention to right now, rather than just doing grammar and stuff like that. Yeah.
Certainly, certainly. And like you said, the phrases and expressions are such a huge part of it. And this is the incredible thing that I find most of my students also coming through the, let's say, the standard education system. They know the grammar, maybe they know the tenses and everything, and then they don't know how to speak, they don't know how to apply it, which is exactly what we were talking about with these exceptions. That, okay, here are 100 exceptions, okay, but what do I do with that? So what it sounds like to me, what you're doing is you're taking the complete opposite approach
That's
and
it.
starting with the things that people struggle with the most, the listening, the accents, the phrases, the vocabulary, and the grammar will come.
Yes, and the same thing with vocabulary because that's the thing. You can get a list of vocabulary and memorize those, but you will not know how they're used unless it's used in real life. So what we used to do, especially in Italy when we were learning how to speak English. Basically, our teacher, I remember she would come to class, she would speak to us in English, even though no one would know a word. And then she would give us things to read, and she would tell us, you read this, and then you highlight the things that you do not know. And then you go back and see in the dictionary. That's how we would do it, basically. Yes. Yes, that's how we would do it.
Okay. And did you find that beneficial?
Yes. And that's how I also do it myself right now. Yes.
Okay. Okay. And do you use any particular dictionaries? Do you have any favorites or just any first dictionary is good enough?
I use Google Translate
Yeah,
right
nice.
now. I became very much digital.
Nice, nice. Very classy.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Okay. And I think this next question is going to be very much related to what you were talking about with Spanish and what we were talking about before with the different sides of you coming out with the different languages you speak. I'm wondering if throughout your learning journey you've gained a greater understanding of each of the cultures that you were learning about, because from what you're saying, I mean, you're learning about the history, the food, and the traditions, the customs. So it seems like your learning is very much focused on the actual culture part of it. Whereas, I mean, if we think back to English and to French and to German, if we can also count that, then it was more of this academic learning. But would you say that your development in a language and seeing content in this language has changed your beliefs or perhaps your understandings of those cultures associated with those languages?
Yeah, I would say that basically, like, especially when I was learning like English or French in Italy, for instance, I remember like the English they teach you at school is mainly the British one. It's mainly the British one. And then when I came to Canada and I went to the States, I feel like it was different. I also realized the accent was different. And then within the States, you have other 15,000 accents because
Yeah.
depending in which state you stay, you have different accent and there are different things associated with it. And the same thing with Spanish. I feel like I used to think there was one way of speaking Spanish, there was one accent, but it's not true. And now I also have like friends from like Costa Rica or like Uruguay, and they tell me, no, we have different ways, different expression. We eat different things. It might be
Yeah.
similar, but it's like different. So I like that because there is diversity within one culture, for instance. And so it did change a little bit my perspective because I feel like we could like at school you learn about the culture through like reading dialogues in a book or if you read something like now if you're watching a video, but there's only you can only learn so much unless you are in the actual place. So when I travel to different places, especially when I travel to Mexico or even Dominican Republic, I feel like it changed a lot of my perspective. And maybe I had some biases before traveling to these places, but once I was there, it was like, no, it's not like that. And it was in a way very pleasant and surprisingly pleasant. That's how I would say. And so it was nice. And I feel like after being to this place, my love for learning languages or learning Spanish, it just grew even further.
Would you mind sharing some of these biases that you had? That, okay, this is true, but no, it actually isn't.
I feel like especially when we talk about, let's say, Mexico, there's always this bias about, okay, it's like dangerous place and things like that. You shouldn't go there by yourself and blah, blah, blah. But when I went there, yes, I stayed in a resort, but I also went outside of the resort and there was nothing to be afraid of. People were very nice, were very friendly, were very warm, and that's what I liked about it. I feel like whatever the TV shows you, it's never the truth. They always add something to it to make it a bit more enjoyable for anyone
Of
watching it,
course.
and they make you like scared about something, but it wasn't like that. So when I went to Mexico, for instance, I had a very nice experience in the resort. I also met a lot of people that work there, and they were all very nice, very warm, very friendly, and that's what I enjoyed about it. And now I feel like I just want to go back to it because I just really enjoyed that experience. I also went to the Mayan villages, and that was a very beautiful experience because I saw how they live authentically. So I've seen the authentic side of Mexico, for instance. So we went there. We went to a village. We basically met people from the Mayan villages, and they are very different from other Mexican people. I felt they also speak a different language too. We ate the traditional food they were singing with their little guitar. It was very nice. It was very nice, and that was very beautiful. I feel like that's also another beauty of learning languages, that you get to see all these things about the culture and what was part of the history and what's still there. So that was nice. And then I went to Chichen Itza, to that pyramid, and I've seen that, and that was also really, really nice. But I would say that getting out of the resort was probably the best thing, because I feel like I've seen what is Mexico, the real Mexico, and it's not what everyone talks about on TV. Honestly, it's never the truth.
Of course. I would say that I had a very similar experience when I told my parents that I'm going to Mexico. Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you going to be okay? Yes. And like you said, we were staying outside of the resorts, and we also went to Chichen Itza and some of these other regions, and to the little island of Cozumel as well. And like you said, I mean, a country like any other, great people, great food, great weather. I mean, what
Exactly.
is there not to like?
Exactly. And
Honestly.
I feel like anything dangerous can happen in any country. It doesn't have
Of
to be
course.
just, yeah. I think you should always be aware of, even in your own city. So,
Of course. Of
mm,
course. I think that's what people tend to forget, that I mean, if we look at the statistics, and I found this incredibly funny. I met a really great Mexican girl while we were there, and she had her boyfriend was from Chicago, and he would always laugh that, you know, statistically Chicago has more shootings and more murders than Mexico, which is like, okay, you know, it's oh, Mexico is so dangerous, but have you noticed Chicago? Like that's not really great. So definitely, like you
exactly.
said, any big city
Exactly.
is a hazard.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
and how do you balance language learning with other parts of your life? So you said at the beginning that you listen to podcasts on your commute to work, I suppose back home as well. Do you have any days where, okay, it's my free day, I focus only on language learning, or is it always a little bit of a balance that you have with your other hobbies and your other activities?
So I do have, basically I use Google Calendar a lot, where I schedule everything that I have to do, especially because I want to keep a balance with like my hobbies and this whole language learning. And usually I try to block the time. That's how I like to work. Let's say if
Mm,
I want to do something, if I want to, like, let's say, work in my Spanish, I block the time so that it's not, so I don't do other things. And if I'm not able to do it, let's say, on that day, I usually switch it to another day. But usually, like, all my activities, all my commitments are basically spread out during the week, but they're all like balanced. And my goal is usually to do a little bit of everything each week, rather than just doing it like once a month, or like once every full moon when I have time.
yeah.
And I think, especially with like Spanish, I think if you want to make sure that you're learning, you have to be like committed. You have to be consistent throughout
Mm.
the week. And so I try to like balance it out there. So I usually try to like listen to a podcast each week, and I try to watch a vlog or something like that. And that's how I know that I'm progressing towards my goal. Yeah.
Okay. And summarizing everything that that we've been talking about, if there's anything that we didn't cover, is there any piece of wisdom or advice or anything of that nature they would like to give to somebody that's either starting or already further along on their journey, but maybe not feeling super motivated?
My piece of advice would be, it's, you know what, I have so many so many advices that I could give. I'm trying to think one in particular that
Can
I
be more
have
than one if you
used.
wish.
So let me see. Basically, okay, I can tell you what I did when I was learning French, because I knew that I had to speak a lot, and I didn't want to pay anyone to do some speaking courses. I was like, let me find a very economic way of doing that. So I actually have a friend who comes from France, and I used to like spend lunchtime with him. and that's how I would like speak Spanish. I would speak like French with him. So basically, I would just chat nonstop and telling him about my day, just speaking in French. And so that would be one advice to anyone who's like looking to like who has a very good knowledge or is like intermediate level of a language, is that if you want to practice, it's always good to find a friend or something with who you can practice. There's also a website called Conversation Exchange, where basically you can find people that speak your native language, or
Mm,
people that with who you want to practice a certain language, and you basically just like connect with these people, decide a time, and then you, let's say, choose an hour where 30 minutes you speak your native language and 30 minutes you speak the languages you're learning, and that's for free. That's for free. That the only thing is that you have to be committed to it, because I feel like sometimes when things are free, sometimes people they just like go. Another thing that I know as well is to use online platform like italki, where basically you can find teachers on these platforms, and you can find teachers like that have conversation lesson, or they teach you certain things and based on whatever need that you have, and you can find someone based on the budget that you have, find someone based on your availability. So that's also an easier way to learn a language. And also the other advice I would say is that learning language is not easy, but I think it's about finding what you like. Especially because if you are put in a situation where, okay, I don't think I have to learn this, like I don't need this for a job, so why am I learning this? But if you can find something that you enjoy, I think will make it effortless when it comes to learning a language. Like it will be so like easy and natural for you that you will like, okay, I'm not tired of learning this. And of course, like living in a country where you're just immersed in that language is also it's also what I would suggest people to do, because you like I know a lot of people who did exchanges where they like went to a different
right.
country. I think that's a great experience, honestly, because you get to leave and be like that person. You know, when they say like when you roam, do like the Romans or something like that.
Right, right.
That's exactly my point, is that you've got to experience everything fully, and that's probably the best experience ever, especially when it comes to learning language, because it accelerates the whole learning process and it makes it motivating, I feel.
Which are all wonderful pieces of advice.
Thank you.
So for the people that are super excited to hear more from you and to learn more about your wisdom, where can people find you? Where do you live?
So I am available on LinkedIn. So it's called Urmi Hossain. I also have a YouTube channel. It's called Urmi Hossain. And funny that you mentioned that is that on YouTube, I have interviews. I actually invite people that teach languages, and that are like language coach, or, things like that. And basically I have that information on YouTube, so they can watch the interviews, and if they want to like take lessons, or if they want to like be part of the community, they can take the information from there. And I also have a blog. It's called myways.ca, and I also have an Instagram account called Urmi.
Everything's going to be in the links below.
Thank you.
Wonderful, perfect. Well, it was such a pleasure, Urmi. Thank you very, very much for sharing your time with us and for sharing all of your wonderful wisdom. And I am certainly looking forward to chatting more again soon.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm glad to see you here. Let me know what you most enjoyed about this conversation, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll see you in the next one. Do zobaczenia.